Thank you, Corla, and I'm happy to be here this evening to work with my colleagues in the Labour Party to support this bill. In the last number of weeks we have worked together on other legislation in the same vein to try and advance women's equality, to address the stark inequalities that exist in our society, and to do our job as legislators to try and bridge that gap. And where we see failings in legislation, we seek to make those changes. And certainly this bill seeks to do so. It's a very practical bill in that it requires employers with greater than 50 employees to publish information about their pay scales to the public, to the state and to their employees, so that we can see if there are any differences between how they pay their male employees as opposed to how they pay their female employees. So it's quite simple information, but it would be hugely effective in making changes. It would also allow the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission to create an information disclosure scheme for employers about the gender pay gap, if any, in their organisations. Now, some organisations will very much welcome this, the ones that are doing a good job, and others might be not so welcoming. But I think that level of uncomfortableness is something that we need to actually work towards getting there. It will allow employers to benchmark against their competitors and should act as an incentive to do better, because companies need to do better. And it will also allow prospective employees to look at those employers and decide who is best to work for, who actually values equality and who will treat me as a good employee properly and treat me equally. The very fact that in 2018 and approaching 2019 that we are looking at a 14% gender pay gap, that women in this country are being paid 14% less than men, and that gap is widening, and that, as Deputy O'Sullivan has pointed out, that as and from the 10th of November, women effectively stop getting paid. This is unacceptable, it is wrong, and there should be a sense of urgency in addressing this. Obviously, we have to address the underlying reasons as to why the pay gap exists in the first place, and there are many reasons. But the fact remains that the pay gap is wrong. And if employers know that they're paying their female employees less, they should be taken to task, they should be forced to publish that information, and they should be forced to actually close that gap completely. But it's no surprise that the fact that women are still the primary caregivers and those that are required to take maternity leave, that will have absences from work, that they are discriminated against because of that. The bill that I and my colleague Deputy Fiona O'Loughlin published not that long ago, that was not supported by government but was supported by the Labour Party, by Sinn Féin, by the Social Democrats, by the Greens. So basically the entire opposition bench supported the bill but government opposed it, would have allowed women to share their maternity leave entitlements with their partner if they so choose to do so. The effect of that would have been twofold. It would have given flexibility to women to get back into the workplace quicker if they want it, but also it would have levelled the playing field. Because then when you're going for a job, the employer might look at the female candidate and look at the male candidate and think, well, actually both candidates might take maternity leave or parental leave. And that level of discrimination would have lessened. But government decided not to support the bill. Minister, when listening to your response as to why you weren't supporting the bill, I have to say I think there were many of us kind of smirking as to the true intention of why the bill was not being supported. To say that you've examined the possibility of bringing forward amendments and that it was just too cumbersome, to me that suggests that it's just inconvenient, and really the Labour Party bet you to it. Isn't that the real reason? They got here ahead of you. You've published heads of a bill, but the lack of urgency. The Labour Party, the bill from the Labour Party that's on the floor today should be supported. Amendments are a normal part of the process in legislating, and the same, I think, defunct argument was put forward by Minister Doherty in why the shared maternity leave bill from Fianna Fáil also could not be supported, among other nonsensical reasons in my view. But the fact remains that the bill is here, it's being supported, and this notion that you can somehow not oppose but not support at the same time, I mean, that just doesn't make sense. You're sitting on the fence. You essentially wanted it to be a Fine Gael bill, but it's not. It's a Labour bill. And like I said, they've just beaten you to it. But earlier when I spoke about the uncomfortableness, I think this is the other elephant in the room. Perhaps it is that businesses are quite uncomfortable with the thought of publishing this data, and perhaps they're lobbying quite hard, and maybe that's part of the reason why Fine Gael in government are not moving with a sense of urgency on this. But let's call a spade, publishing those figures, companies having to actually put in black and white what they're paying their male employees and what they're paying their female employees might be quite embarrassing for some companies. And I'm sure it would act very quickly as an incentive to close that gap. So, Minister, let's have a sense of urgency about this. Let's get this bill passed, let's get these laws onto our statute books, and let's do our bit in terms of gently encouraging companies to close that gap once and for all. Because the message that we need to send to the business community is that equality is a cornerstone of our democracy. We live and we want to live in a just and fair society. Women are not being treated equally. They are being paid less. They continue to be paid less. And until we as legislators do our job and ensure that they can no longer pay women less than men, that gap will continue to persist and it will continue to widen. So, Minister, let's all work together in the spirit of equality and advancing women's rights and ensure that that pay gap gets closed once and for all.
Thank you.